Welcome back to the Piping Pastor. Well, bit of a happy and sad day, kind of here in El Paso. My oldest daughter will be heading back to college tomorrow morning, so the long winter break is over. Time to go back and hit the books. So we're happy for her to keep going and pursuing her education. She's very much looking forward to these classes she's taking in the next term. But we're all also kind of sad that she's leaving again. Happily, we'll see each other again on spring break, and then, as she pointed out, only like 4 more months of school in this year, and she was amazed at how quickly time had flown. I said, "Yeah, as you get older, time seems to increase in pace." So we got to go out today, doing one of the things that she and I really enjoy doing, which is going to a used bookstore and going out to lunch. I found a rather neat little collection of poems from a Palestinian poet. Collection of work from 1971 to 2005. And I'm unfamiliar with this person. So I'm looking forward to reading through that. And then after, we get through this current sermon in our classic sermon series, going back to the poetry in the Bible series and kind of seeing what this person has to say. Rather looking forward to that. For our session today, smoking the Fusiliers ration. I think I've come to the conclusion that I do really like this blend. It's not just, wanting it because it's going to become rare or unobtainable, perhaps. Of course, it's out of stock now, as everything else is right at the moment. So I put in the notices to see if when it comes back in stock, if it comes back in stock, then I'll buy some 10s and sell it. But I've been hearing some scuttlebutt from a few different sources, videos and postings and so forth, that there may not be any further production. This is something that, it's unfounded, right? I have no hard evidence. I don't know anybody at STG or anything. But it was something I was concerned about when they first said they're going to continue production, until they shut the factory down in, I think, was it February? March. So they're going to go through the current stock, produce up until then and leave, right? And when I first heard that, I thought, well, yeah, but if there's a huge run on this tobacco, all the tobaccos that they're going to be discontinuing, if there's a huge run on them and they sell all their stores, then from a businessman's perspective, if I'm looking at that and say, well, I can keep that factory open for another month and produce these tobaccos and sell them, these tobaccos which I have already determined are not going to make me any money, or I can just close that factory down early because I've gotten rid of all of my back stock. I'm good to go. And then just be done with them, which that's what I've heard that is currently the idea. So everybody who jumped in right away and panic bought got the tobaccos, and there won't be any more because there's no need for them to keep producing stuff that they're going to discontinue in a month anyway. I don't know if that's the case. As I said, I've heard from no official sources. I don't have those kind of ties to the tobacco producing community that, like, some of the other presenters do. So I'll wait to hear more wisdom on that from others, but that's some of the scuttlebutt I've heard. But then I also heard recently Simon said in a recent video that he was under the impression that STG was going to take those blends and just move them to the German market, start selling them through the German market. So discontinuing them in the American production facility and offering them in America and selling them through the German market. So they wouldn't have to worry about the FDA nonsense. If that's the case, great. I have to go through a few more steps to try to get the stuff from Germany, but the end of the day, it might still be available. And if not, if everything gets discontinued and I never get to buy a Fusiliers ration again, I'll be okay. There's plenty of other tobaccos out there, plenty of other blends, and there's a bunch of blends I've never had. So I might find something else that I like just as much or even better. So I'm not really going to, cry myself to sleep. I have my favorite tobacco. It's Cellar Deep. I'm good to go. So everything else is icing on the cake. In any case, so in our sermon today, continuing the sermon on Enoch, when I finished up at the end, at the last one, talking about moral degradation of society and the fact that Noah had seen, known, and understood the moral decline that was happening around him. And how we can ourselves become tolerant apologists of this by just letting stuff go and saying, okay, you know what? It just is what it is. No sense taking a stand against it because it's everywhere. I'm just going to do my thing, right? But there's some further dangers that go along with that. And that's kind of where he goes in the sermon now, leaving off from the tolerant apologist part of it here. It is not that evil triumphant, as in Babylon, crushes out the remaining righteousness in the land. There it is, and we take it for granted in ourselves and others. It is part of the actual sum of human life and activity. Nay, it is a very large part, and our hearts too. It finds something like countenance and sympathy. What is good, we say to ourselves, of finding fault with the weather or an epidemic? We may wish that things were otherwise. We cannot but resign ourselves to take them as they are. And this acquiescence in evil as inevitable involves as something beyond. It leads us to shut our eyes to what is the deepest and truest of all human presentment. Apart from the revelation of God, it points to its certain consequences. So what he's saying here is that beyond just saying, oh, it's everywhere, I can't do anything about it, I'll just do my own thing, we start to take it as it is what it is, right? It's there and it exists. And it's not that it's, like in Babylon where it crushes out all righteousness, but it exists. It's part of human existence. It's part of the way things are. It's in our hearts, the sin nature in our hearts, it's in the world, it's everywhere. We come to this idea that it's just part of natural existence. And what he says here, it points to the certain consequences. It blinds us to the fact that it must be followed at some time or another by punishment. So he's saying we start to talk ourselves into this idea that evil is not only inevitable, it's part of nature. It's part of humanity. It's part of the way things are because they are, right? Like famine, like epidemic. What good does it do to rail against the storm? It's just a part of the way that things are. And when we start to think that way, then we start to blind ourselves to the fact that it must be followed by punishment. Because you can't have, moral and ethical decline, degradation, and all these different things like that, just as like part of nature, right? We can't look at it in the way of like nature red in tooth and claw, that the wolf, kills the deer and tears it up and stuff like that. We don't think of that as murder, right? That's just part of nature because the wolf has to eat. We can't take that same kind of logic and apply it to moral and ethical decline, because moral and ethical decline must be followed by punishment eventually. If it were otherwise, if it weren't to be followed by punishment, God would not be God, a necessarily and intrinsically moral being. So he's saying if moral and ethical decline existed, and we blinded ourselves to it, saying it's just part of nature, whatever, we don't think about punishment because how can you punish the nature, right? How can you punish something that's just exists? But if that were the case, then God would not be God, because God could not be an intrinsically good moral being in and through the entire universe and then allow this moral and ethical decline to exist or to gain fruit and whatever with no punishment whatsoever. Could it be otherwise? The first and foremost earnest forms of belief in conscience would be untrustworthy. And yet, we may, by familiarity with this indolent sympathy with evil, learn first to forget that evil leads to punishment, and next, not improbably, even to deny it. It is not inconceivable, we say, that a world embracing mass of evil should be punished. Its very universality is its safeguard and its protection. It might be punished if it were an exception. It must escape simply because it is the rule. This is what we secretly say to ourselves. We shut our eyes first to the truth of morals, and then we flatter ourselves that we naturally escape the effects. So we're saying, first of all, we shut our eyes to it. We just ignore it. We're like, oh, you know what? That's the way things are. It's when he was saying we become, the passive apologist of it. And he said the next thing is like when we get past that, then we just say, well, it's just part of nature. It's just, evil exists. And if evil exists, evil is prevalent. How can you punish something that's prevalent? If moral decline and ethical decline, if all these things are just everywhere, you can't possibly punish that, right? That's the lie that we tell ourselves. And it was against this tacit and fatal influence of a corrupt moral atmosphere that Noah's life was a protest of resistance. He said Noah did not shut his eyes and say, whatever. They're going to do their thing. They're moral. I'm just going to sit over here and take care of myself. He didn't do that. It bothered him. He saw it. It affected him. He took steps to try to counter it. Right? He listened to God. He built the ark. He did these things. But then the other thing that he did not do was say, well, it's everywhere. Right? Noah didn't say, evil just exists. Moral decline just exists. It's fine. God can't punish everybody. Right? It's like driving on the freeway. If everyone's speeding, the cop can't pull someone over for speeding because the guy next to me was speeding, so it must be okay. It's not how the law works. It's not how morals and ethics work in a universe created and in presence of God, because God is an intrinsically moral and ethical being, right? So that stuff must follow with punishment. So we can't ignore it. We can't sit down, shut our eyes to it, and we can't justify it, because moral and ethical decline is followed by punishment. So we have to be aware of it, and then we have to stand up against it. And that's what he was saying there, that Noah was this example of this higher level of humanity, right? Because not only because he listened to God, but because the stuff around him bothered him, and he didn't justify it, he didn't ignore it, he didn't lean into it, and he didn't join in with it. He stood up for himself. He stood up for the morals and ethics that he knew were right, and as a result, Noah was counted as an exceptional person. Still read about Noah today. So, and again, it's never easy, right? If it were easy to stand up to moral and ethical decline, probably wouldn't have moral and ethical decline, right? Because everybody would be standing up for it. It may make you unpopular. It may, cause you to lose some friends. People that you admire and have a fun, good time with, right? But the end of the day is that all that is transitory. There's a higher purpose. There's a higher calling. There is, as in the sermon he's talking about with Enoch and Noah, there is an immortality that comes along with this, apart from just the saving grace of Christ that allows us to live in paradise with God for eternity. There's something here that has a legacy impact here. And it has to do with identifying moral and ethical decline, not ignoring it, not leaning into it, but standing up against it. So, hard thing to do. Easy thing to say, hard thing to do. But hard things are usually the ones that have the biggest payoffs. So, in any case, I'm going to get back to what may be my last few bowls of Fusilators ration. I hope you have a lovely week. As always, happy reading.